I had lived 12 years alone under Lantern Peak, and I meant to die that way, when the wind off the cathedral rims brought me a sound that was not weather. It was a horse going down. You learn the difference up high, the long animal cry, the scrabble of shod and unshod hooves on ice, a man's voice or a woman's pitched against the storm and losing. I had a green colt half-broke in the round pen and a fire I just got to draw, and every sensible thing I owned told me to bar the door and let the mountain have whatever fool was out in it. Instead, I pulled my coat off the peg, because 12 years is a long time to be sensible, and I was tired of it. The first blizzard of that year had come 3 weeks early, the way the worst ones do, before the high grass had cured, and before any band with sense was off the flats. I'd seen the sky go the color of a bruise that afternoon and had brought my stock in clothes. Now the snow came sideways, fine and mean, and I went down off my bench toward the pale river trail with a lantern that the wind kept trying to murder. I found them where the trail pinched between two boulders the size of root cellars. A blood bay was down on its side in a drift, blowing hard, one foreleg folded wrong under it, and a woman was at its head, kneeling in the snow with her whole weight on the bridle, talking to the animal low and steady so it wouldn't thrash and finish itself. Behind her stood 2 more horses, heads down and rimed white, and on the nearer one an old man sat slumped and wrapped to the eyes, and beside him a boy of maybe 14 held the lead rope of a pack horse, and a fourth figure, another woman, older, stood with a rifle held not at me exactly, but ready. They were of the river bands. I knew that the way you know weather before any word is said, the cut of the old man's robe, the beadwork on the woman's knife sheath catching my lantern, the long unshod stride of the horses bred for this country and not bought off a freighter. And I knew in the same breath every reason they had to put a ball through me and ask nothing. Settlers had given the bands of that country sickness, broken paper, and the long road east to the agency, and not much else. The rifle did not waver. I stopped where the light could reach my face and I held both hands away from my coat. "I've a barn," I said, "and a fire, half a mile backing up. The horse can't go on like that and your old man's freezing on that animal." My voice came out rougher than I meant. I'd not used it for company in a long while. The woman at the bay's head turned and looked at me. I will tell you that in 12 years I had got used to a certain emptiness behind my own eyes when I caught my face in the shaving glass, and what struck me first about her was that there was nothing empty behind hers at all. She was perhaps 30, with a strong straight nose and a scar like a thread along one cheekbone, and snow in her brows, and she measured me head to boot in about the time it takes a man to lose a card game. She did not look afraid. She looked like a woman doing arithmetic, how far, how cold, how much she could trust, and what it would cost if she was wrong. "You live alone," she said. It was not a question. Her English was clean and plain. "I do." "Then you have no reason to want us under your roof," she said, "and 100 to want us gone. So tell me the true reason, or we will take our chances with the rocks." The older woman with the rifle said something to her in their own tongue, fast, and the younger answered without turning, and I understood not a word, but I understood the shape of it. He could be more trouble than the storm. "The reason," I said, "is that I heard your horse go down, and I'm not going to stand in my warm house and listen to people die a half-mile off. That's the whole of it. I haven't got a better one, and I won't make one up." She held my eyes a moment longer. Then she did the thing that told me before anything else did who she was. She did not thank me, and she did not decide for the old man. She went to him, and she put her hand on his knee and spoke to him, and waited, and he lifted his head and looked at me out of a face seemed deep as creek-cut clay, and it was he who gave the small nod, and only then did she turn back and say, "We will come to the barn, not the house, and we take nothing we have not earned." She put a hand flat on her own chest. "Winona," she said, then with the flat of her hand toward the old man, "my grandfather." She did not give me his name, and I did not ask. It was not mine to have yet. "Amos Hale," I said. "Let's get this horse up or put him down, and I'd rather the first." It took the 2 of us and the boy and a length of my lead rope and the better part of an hour, and in the end the bay got his legs under him with the leg only badly wrenched and not broke, which I have always counted a small mercy that I did not deserve. Winona worked that animal like she'd grown out of its withers. She knew exactly where to lift, when to let it rest, how to keep it from panic. And twice she put a hand on the gelding's neck and said a low word, and the trembling went out of it. I had broken horses my whole life. I had never once seen it done quite like that. We brought them up the bench in the screaming dark, the lantern dead by then, the way found by Feel and by my dog Tuck barking us home from the porch. I put their horses in the barn with my own and forked down hay and broke the ice on the trough, and I built up the barn stove I kept for foaling, and I left them to it. I went back to the house. I did not press the house on them again. A man learns the difference between offering a thing and forcing it, and if he doesn't, he ought to. But I went out twice more in the night with coffee and a side of bacon and the better part of a deer I'd hung, and I left it inside the barn door without standing over it, and both times the rifle was leaned in the corner now and not in the older woman's hands, and the third time I came the old man was sitting up by the stove with color back in his face, and he raised one hand to me, palm out, and held it there. I raised mine the same way. We were a long way from friends. But that is how it starts, with two cold men in a barn holding up their empty hands. In the morning the storm had blown itself ragged, and the world was white to the rims and bitter still, the kind of cold that cracks the trees like rifle fire. I went out to feed and found Winona already at it, pitching hay to my stock as well as theirs, and when I started to tell her she needn't, she gave me a look that closed my mouth. "You said we take nothing we have not earned," she said, "so we earn it. Where do you want the rest of this fork?" I want to be honest about the next part, because it would be easy to make it pretty and false. We did not warm to each other in a day. The old man's chest had gone bad in the cold, a wet rattle when he breathed that I didn't like the sound of, and they could not move on into that weather, and so they stayed 3 days, then a week, then the days stopped counting. And in that week I learned that Winona had been leading them not on some passing trip but for their lives. Their wintering ground on the Smoke Flats had been signed away over their heads to a cattle outfit, and they'd been given the road to the agency 200 miles east, where, she said plainly, more of her people died of the cough and the bad rations in a winter than ever died in the open. Her grandfather had said he would not go east to die in a stranger's pen. So she had taken him and the others. The boy was her sister's son. The older woman was her grandfather's brother's wife, and started for the high country to find a band of their own kin said to be wintering somewhere under the cathedral rims, if they could reach them before the snow and the soldiers both. "You're leading," I said one evening. I'd taken to sitting in the barn with them of an evening. It was warmer for the company and I'd stopped pretending otherwise. Not him. I tipped my head at the old man who was dozing by the stove. "He led for 60 years, she said. "His eyes are bad now and his chest is worse and his knees will not sit a horse a full day, so I lead. Does that trouble you?" There was a flint in it daring me. "No," I said. "Saw you with that bay. You'd lead most men I know straight off a cliff and they'd thank you for the view." It was a poor joke and it just fell there in the straw, but the older woman, her name was Tassina, I'd learned, barked a laugh. And Winona's mouth did something it had not done yet, a small, unwilling curve, and I felt that curve go through me like the first warm day after a hard winter, which is a thing I had no business feeling and knew it. Here is what I had not told them, and would not for a good while. That my Ellen had been 12 years in the ground up on the rise behind the house, her and the child she'd died trying to bring, and that I had broken horses alone ever since, because horses do not require you to talk and do not leave and do not die in your arms on a kitchen floor while you hold a useless lamp and pray to a God you've quit believing in. I had built a wall around that, brick by brick, and I had kept it whole a long time, and the trouble with a wall is that it keeps the cold in as surely as out. The hand was what cracked it, the first crack anyway. I was rough handling that green colt the second week, in too much of a hurry as a man gets when he's chasing something out of his head and into his hands, and the colt spun and slammed me into the rails, and I came away with 2 fingers of my left hand pointing where fingers don't, and a gash up the wrist that bled like a stuck hog. I sat down in the snow harder than I meant to. Winona was over the rail before I'd finished swearing. She did not fuss. She took the hand in both of hers, turned it once to the light, said, "Bite down on this," and put a folded strip of leather between my teeth, and then she set those 2 fingers with a quick, clean wrench that whited the whole world out for a second. And by the time I came back to myself, she'd already got the leather off and was packing the gash with something green and bitter-smelling from a pouch at her belt, and binding it tight with a strip of clean trade cloth. "You set horses' legs and men's hands both," I said when I could talk. "Bones are bones," she said. "Yours are softer than the bay's. Hold still." Then, not looking up from the binding, "Why do you ride that colt like you are angry at God?" I had not told her about Ellen. I had told her nothing. But she'd seen it anyway, the way she saw everything, and the question went in under the wall where no question had got in 12 years, and to my own great surprise I answered it. I told her about Ellen and the child and the rise behind the house, sitting there in the snow with my ruined hand in hers, and she did not say she was sorry, which I have come to understand the value of, because the people who say they're sorry are mostly asking you to comfort them for your grief. She just listened, with her thumb resting still on my wrist until I'd run out of words. Then she said, "My husband died of the cough on the road 4 winters ago, and our daughter the same winter." She looked up at me. "I do not ride at God either, but it is a long way to carry it alone, Amos Hale." That was the first time she said my whole name soft, and not as a thing held at arm's length. The wall did not come down, but I felt the mortar go out of it. I'd be lying if I said the country left us to it. The country never does. It was the boy, Hoka, who came running up to the house one noon to say riders, and I went out, and there were 3 of them coming up my own trail bold as you please, and the lead one I knew, Del Pryor, who ran stock detection for the Cattle Association that had taken the Smoke Flats, a square, hard man who was not cruel so much as he was certain, which can be worse. The other 2 were just hired guns trying to look like more than they were. "Hale," Pryor said, drawing rein. He looked past me at the barn where the unshod horses showed, and his face set. "Heard in Marrow Springs you've been buying odd lots of supply. Now I see why. You're harboring a band that's wanted at the agency. There's a Major Selden been hunting these all up and down the river. You're in a bad spot, friend." "I'm in my own dooryard," I said, "which is a fine spot, last I checked the paper on it, and I haven't seen anybody wanted for anything. I see an old man with a sick chest and his family weathered in by the storm, same as I'd give to any soul caught out, and same as you'd want done for your mother." "Law's the law," said Pryor. "Those flats are deeded now. Those people don't belong on this range. Neither does whatever you're playing at." I felt rather than saw Winona come to the barn door behind me, and Tassina with her, and I knew the rifle would be near. And I knew that if a shot went off in that dooryard the whole thing went to blood, and the law would call it the band's fault no matter who fired, and Pryor would ride home and sleep easy. So I did the only thing I had, which was to keep talking and keep my hands where everyone could see them. "Del," I said, "I've sold the association 40 head of broke saddle stock these last 3 years, and I'll sell you 40 more, and I've never short-weighed you a pound nor put a sick horse in a good string. You know me for a square man. I'm telling you square. There's nobody here for you. There's a Snowden old man and his folks under my roof until the trail clears, and then they'll move on to their own kin and be off your range and off your mind. You can ride up to Selden and tell him you searched Amos Hale's place and found a wrenched horse and a cough, which is the God's truth, and you can have coffee while you write it. Or you can start something in my dooryard over 4 cold people and a deeded flat, and you can explain to the association why you got their best horsebreaker shot dead defending strangers, because I'll stand here, Del. I will. 12 years I've not had much worth standing for. I'd as soon spend it on this as anything." It got very quiet. The hired men looked at Pryor. Pryor looked at me a long time and then past me at the old man, who had come to the barn door under his own power and stood there, straight as his bent back would let him, with his blind-going eyes fixed on Pryor's face in a way that I think unsettled the man more than the rifle would have. And Pryor was not cruel. That was the thing. He was a certain man, and certain men can be moved if you give them a road to move down that doesn't cost them their certainty all at once. "Coffee," he said at last, like the word tasted bad. "Then I file it as you said. They're gone inside the week, hail, weather or no. I see them on this range after, I can't help you." "Inside the week," I agreed. "You have my hand on it." And I gave him my good hand and he took it, and the two hired men let their breath out, and we all went in and drank coffee like Christian neighbors, and nobody died in my dooryard that day. After they'd gone, Winona stood beside me on the porch watching them down the trail, and she said very low, "You would have stood there." "Yes." "Why, you have a paper on this land. You could keep it forever by letting us go." I looked at the rise behind the house, where the snow lay soft over Ellen and the child, and I looked back at her, and I found I had the answer ready, which surprised me, because I'd thought there wasn't one. "Because for 12 years I've kept this place by keeping everybody off it," I said, "and it's the lonesomest 40 acres in the territory, and I am so tired of being the only thing alive on it. You came onto it half froze and asking nothing, and your old man held up his hand to me in the barn, and your boy laughs at my dog, and you set my hand and told me I'd carried it alone too long. I'd rather lose the paper standing for that than keep the paper and go back to the quiet. That's the true reason. You asked me for the true reason the first night. That's still the only kind I've got." She did not answer for a while. The cold made our breath into one cloud between us. Then she said, "We cannot stay. You heard him. And there is the band under the rims, my kin, who do not know if we are alive. I have to get my grandfather to them before the deep snow shuts the passes." "I know it," I said. "I'll take you. I know these passes blind. I've broke horses in every draw between here and the rims. Your bay's not sound to lead them, and your pack horse is poor. Take 3 of my mountain-bred geldings, they'll get the old man over the top easy, and I'll guide you to your kin and see you safe in, and then ride home." I'd said it before I'd thought it, and finding I'd said it, I found I meant it, and finding I meant it scared me worse than Pryor had. The trail to the rims took us 4 days. I will not pretend they were easy days. The cold sat in the bones, and the high pass was a white knife edge with death on both sides, and we led the horses over it one at a time with the wind trying to take us. But I will tell you they were the 4 best days I'd had in 12 years, and I think she'd say the same of hers, hard as they were, because something happens between two people when they put their lives in each other's hands over and over across cold country, and the trust comes back whole each time. The first night I made the fire and she would not let me make the second. She built it better than I did and was wry about it. The old man, riding the steady gelding I'd given him, found his strength a little on the trail, and on the 3rd night by the fire he spoke to me for a long time in his tongue while Winona translated, telling me how that country had looked when he was young, before the flats were deeded, before any of it, the grass to a horse's belly, and the bands following the seasons like the seasons were a road laid down for them by something kind. He was not bitter telling it. He was just remembering it true so that someone besides the dead would have heard it. I understood I was being given something, being trusted with a thing, and I have kept it. I keep it still. On the 4th day we came down off the pass into a sheltered park under the cathedral rims where the snow lay thinner and wood smoke stood up in a dozen thin straight lines. And there was the band, her kin. And I watched a thing I will carry to my grave, which was Winona riding down into a camp that had thought her dead, with her grandfather alive on a horse beside her. And the cry that went up was a sound no man forgets who's heard it. They came running. There was a woman who turned out to be Winona's mother's sister, and there were children, and there was a great deal said that I could not follow and did not need to. I sat my horse at the edge of it where I would not intrude, an outsider, the only settler within 40 miles, and I thought, well, you've done the thing. Now you ride home to the lonesome 40 acres, and you've got a good memory to keep you company, which is more than you had a month ago." I'd half turned the gelding when Winona caught my rein. "Where are you going?" she said. "Home," I said. "You're safe in. I gave Pryor my hand they'd be off the range, and they are, and I'll keep the geldings up here for you to send back come spring if you've a mind, no hurry." "Get down off the horse, Amos Hale," she said, "and come and eat and meet my people, and stop being a fool in front of all of them, because they are watching, and they have been asking my grandfather about you for an hour." So I got down. I will keep what passed in that camp mostly to myself, because some of it is not the kind of thing you put in a story for strangers. But I'll tell you the heart of it. I stayed 3 days. I learned the names of her kin, and they learned mine, and made a rough music of it that I came to like. I worked alongside their men, breaking 2 rank young horses that had got the better of everyone, and I think that did more for me with that band than any fine words could have, because a man's hands tell the truth about him faster than his mouth ever will, and they saw I knew horses and used them gentle, and after that I was not quite a stranger. And on the 3rd evening her grandfather sent for me. He sat by his fire with Winona beside him to put his words into mine, and he looked at me out of those eyes that could no longer see much but somehow saw plenty, and he said, she said it for him, and her voice was not quite steady, that he had lived a long life and watched the settlers come and take the flats and break the paper and bring the cough, and that he had not, in all that life, met one of them he would trust with the life of a single horse, let alone the life of his granddaughter. And that he had watched me stand in my dooryard with my empty hands out and put my own life between his family and a hard man for no profit, and that he had watched me lead them over the pass and ask nothing and turn for home without a word, and that he had decided I was not a settler at all in the way that mattered, but only a man, the way he was a man, and the bay was a horse, and the snow was the snow. And he said that what he had to give was small now, an old blind man with a bad chest and no flats to his name, but that he gave it freely, and it was the only thing of his that no soldier and no paper and no winter had ever been able to take from him, and that was his trust. He put it in my keeping the way I'd put coffee inside the barn door that first night, not forced on me, only set down where I could take it up if I chose. I have been given a number of things in my life. I have never been given anything to match that before or since. I looked at Winona, who just put her own grandfather's trust into English with her eyes wet and her chin up, and I said, to her and not to him, because it was hers to answer too. "Then I'll ask it plain. I've got a high meadow under Lantern Peak with good water and grass to a horse's belly and a barn that's warmer than the house, and it's a hard place to be alone, and I've been alone in it 12 years. I'm asking you to come and not be alone in it with me. And I'm telling your kin," I said, lifting my voice so the fire's whole circle could hear it whether they followed the words or not, "that the meadow is open ground to this band, this winter and every winter, to pass and to camp and to weather in, deeded paper be hanged, for as long as I'm above the grass and longer if I can fix it so. That's not a bride price and it's not a trade. A man doesn't buy what she is, and I'd not insult her by trying. It's just that her people are going to be my people if she'll have me, and a man keeps his own people safe. That's the whole of it. I haven't got a better reason, and I won't make one up." Winona looked at me a long moment across that fire, doing her arithmetic one last time, how far, how cold, how much to trust, what it would cost if she was wrong. And then she did the thing she'd done the first night that told me who she was. She did not answer for herself alone. She turned and spoke to her grandfather, and to her aunt, and to the circle, and they spoke back. And there was laughter in it and something graver under the laughter. And at the end of it she turned to me, and the small, unwilling curve had become a whole smile, the first full one I ever had from her, and it lit that cold park up brighter than the fire. "I will have you, Amos Hale," she said, "and my people will winter in your meadow, and you will stop saying you have no better reason because that one is plenty." We were married twice, as it happened, which suited me fine. Once in the way of her people, there in the park under the rims with her grandfather's hands on us both, and once down in Merrill Springs by the circuit preacher when he came through in the spring. Because Winona said a wise woman makes her marriage good in the eyes of every law that might someday come asking, and she was right, the way she was right about most things. I will tell you only that both times I meant it down to the ground, and that what passed between us after I'll keep for us, except to say it was tender and it was chosen, and it was a long time coming for us both, and the lonesome went out of that 40 acres like cold out of a thawing field. Del Pryor, I'll say for him, kept his word and a little more. When Selden's soldiers came up the river that spring looking for a band that had vanished into the high country, it was Pryor who told them the trail had gone cold past Merrill Springs, and there was nothing up under the rims but rock and a fool horsebreaker with a new wife, and he looked the major in the eye while he said it. Years on, when I asked him why, he said only that a man who'd stand in his own dooryard the way I had was a man worth being wrong alongside of, and that he'd done enough being right to last him. We were friends to his death, Dell and I, which I'd not have bet a plugged nickel on that cold noon in my yard. Her grandfather lived 4 more winters, all of them in the meadow when the snow came. In a good warm lodge we set up in the lee of the bench where the cough couldn't get its claws in him, and he died in the spring of the 5th year in his sleep with his family around him and not in any stranger's pen, which was the one thing he'd asked of the world, and the world, for once, with a little help, allowed it. We buried him up on the rise. I'd not have thought, 12 years before, that I'd ever lay anyone up there beside my Ellen and the child, or that it would feel like anything but more grief piled on. But Winona stood with me at all 3 graves, and she said her people believe the dead are not gone east to some agency of the sky, but are still about, in the grass and the water and the wind off the rims, near to those who keep them well. And standing on that rise with her hand in mine, I found I could nearly believe it, which from a man who'd quit believing in everything is no small thing to confess. I'm old now telling this. My hands have gone stiff and I don't break the rank ones anymore. Hoka does that, grown into a man with a wife and a string of his own, and he does it gentler than I ever did. The meadow under Lantern Peak is still open ground to the river band, written into a paper now harder to break than the one that took the flats, because Winona was right that a wise woman makes a thing good in the eyes of every law, and we spent good years and good money making this one good. Her people winter here still. There are children on the bench in the snow who do not know the country was ever closed to them, and I count that the best thing my 40 acres ever grew. And Winona is beside me yet, gray now where the snow used to catch in her brows, still wry, still right about most things, still able to set a man's hand or a horse's leg with 2 quick motions and no fuss. Of an evening we sit on the porch and watch the wood smoke stand up straight from the lodges down the bench, and sometimes she'll catch me looking at her instead of the smoke and she'll say, "What?" And I'll say, "Nothing. Just that you came up onto the lonesomest 40 acres in the territory one cold night asking nothing, and you've been the warm in it ever since." And she'll do that small, unwilling curve of the mouth that I fell into all those years ago, the one she still pretends she can keep off her face. And she'll say I'm a sentimental old fool, and she'll be right. But here is the thing her grandfather knew, sitting blind by his fire all those winters back, that took me half my life to learn. They told me, all of them, the whole country told me, that no settler could ever cross to where she stood, that the divide between her people and mine was as wide and as cold as the pass over the rims, and that a sensible man stayed his own side of it. And maybe for most it's so. But I have crossed it, every day for going on 30 years, on a bridge built out of nothing but 2 cold people holding up their empty hands in a barn, and a hand set, and a grief shared, and a trust given freely that no winter could take, and I am here to tell you it holds. It holds better than the deeded flats and the broken paper and all the certain men's certainty. It is the soundest thing I ever built, and I built horses for a living. The wind comes off the cathedral rims the way it always has, and it carries the wood smoke and the children's voices up to where I sit, and I am not, by any measure I once believed in, alone. I never will be again. A man asks for a true reason, and sometimes, if he's fool enough to open the gate, the cold night hands him one and never takes it back.